machloikis and the Gemara and Daf Kuf, and not a machloikis. There are 4 opinions on Daf Kuf Lamed Gimel. So why don't we make a Mila Shaloi B'Zman Adoi Chiyontiv? All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed Ches. We began the 20th chapter, Toilin, with the machloikes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, both regarding whether one is allowed to suspend a strainer in a way that one can argue you are making a temporary oil. Rabbi Eliezer holds that you are allowed to suspend it on Yom Tiv, not on Shabbos, but you could suspend it on Yom Tiv. First of all, B'chlal, making a temporary oil is only us in Midrabanan. And as we just learned yesterday at the end, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that even activities that are called preliminaries to food preparation is something that lechatchila is allowed to be done on Yom Tiv, which is why toilin. And Rabbi Eliezer holds that if it was already suspended on a keli before Shabbos, then a person is allowed to put wine through this mishameres, through the strainer on Shabbos. There are many reasons in the Rishonim as to why is Rabbi Eliezer so lenient. We quoted yesterday one, and that is that the concept of straining or separating is normally only midoiraisa when you are storing that which you are separating. And over here, you're sifting something and you're using it right away. Rabbi Eliezer is very lenient, and the Chachamim here also hold that you are allowed to put the wine through it on Yom Tiv because that's mamish food preparation, but not on Shabbos. And we're going to start today by further looking into and analyzing and understanding and applying the Shita of the Chachamim, which means that we're going to be speaking again about making an oil aray on Shabbos and Yom Tiv. This is a topic that we also learned about a little bit on Daf Kuf Chaf Hey Amud Beis. We're going to be learning about the issur of straining wine on Shabbos. We're going to be learning about adding to a temporary oil, whether that's permitted, and as we'll see that you can't make a temporary oil, but you are allowed to add to a temporary oil. We're going to be learning one shita that you cannot wear a wide-brimmed hat on Shabbos. How great is that? There's a havamina, and that's because you're making some sort of oil aray. At the end, we will not subscribe to that understanding at all. We're going to have 3 innovations of Rav. 2 of them are regarding Hilchos Shabbos, and one is going to be about learning Torah, which will lead us into a piece of Agadah that sounds shocking. That one opinion holds that Asida Torah shetishtachach mi Yisrael. The Gemara will explain what that means. And then the Rashbi, who very strongly disagrees with that, and he says, Chas v'sholem shetishtachach Torah mi Yisrael. However, there is something, as we will see, that was foretold in Parshas Kisavi that will happen. And ultimately, as we'll explain the Gemara, that all of that really is something of a positive nature. Okay, Chavra, we're going to have a lot of details of applications of Hilchos Shabbos today. It's going to be a fascinating daf. We left off on Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amid Beis, second to last slide from the bottom of the Amid. Just before we begin, I do want to mention that the Hashgacha Pratis, last night I went to what we call a Bris Yitzchak, and as I'm reading the Zohar, I chapped that when we learned the Machlokes Rashi in Rabbeinu Tam yesterday, when it says in the bracha of a bris, Yedid, Asher Kidesh Yedid mi beten. So we quoted that Rashi says Yedid goes to Yitzchak. Yitzchak, Kare Yedid. The second to last place was in the previous Pedic, brings from the Rabbeinu Tam that Yedid mi beten goes on Avraham Avinu. Guys, this is a machlokes in the Zohar. It's amazing. And that means that amongst Tanoim, there was already a machlokes. Who does the Yedid refer to? We'll speak about this, God willing, at another time. But let's go over here again. Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin, 2 lines, second to last line before the bottom of the Amid. The Chachamim hold, all right, there was, again, like we mentioned, there are 2 arguments in the Mishnah. First one is about whether you may suspend a strainer on a keli. And the way we explained that these details are important is that they would have a large keli. It was a large keli. And when they would suspend the strainer, they would stretch it out fully all the way around the circumference of the opening of the cup or of the jug. And then when you would pour wine through it, so all of the neshamot, all of the dregs were to get stuck on the top, and the wine were to go down on the bottom. And the issue of suspending it is that I know you're not leaving it there permanently, but this is going to be called, you are making a oil arai on Shabbos, and the Chachamim indeed say that you may not do it. And not only you may not do it on Shabbos, but the Chachamim explicitly say that you may not do it, right, even beyontiv. So says the Gemara, what type of isur is this, Chachamim? If a person indeed suspended such a mishameres, my meaning is Yichai Vachatos, is an isur deraisa, is an isur derabanan. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, that Tola, according to the Chachamim, Yichai Vachatos. And on that, right away, Amalei Abaya, you're telling me that if a person makes what we will call a temporary oil, Yichai Vachatos, Elamato Tola Kuza Besichta. The person is going to suspend a kuza jug from a peg. Now, the point is not that when you suspend a jug, you're creating an oil. The point is that when you suspend something on a peg, by default, it's something of temporary nature. And there we know that when you hang a pot up on the wall on a peg, you did nothing. Why not binyan? Because it's temporary. So hachinami de machayev, if you're going to suspend such a jug, no one will subscribe to that. No, it's how can it be that if you do something temporary, you should be chayev achatos daf kuf lamed ches, and indeed Ella Amar Abayim, that no, that when the Chachamim said that you may not do it, it's only midrabanan hi. And even more than that, here we open up a topic called Uvda Dechoil, that shelo yasik ederach shu oisav b'choil. As Rashi writes on the top, that El Rabbi midrabanan ka'asri lachachamim, right? They must listen to loishafkinen le'lemitliye. You don't allow them to suspend such a strainer. Leme'evad uvda dechoil. You're doing a weekday activity, and there's a huge discussion exactly what is the issue with doing a weekday activity. Is it because it resembles a malacha? Is it that if you're going to be engaged in weekday activities, you might end up doing a malacha, which means that even if you're doing something that doesn't even resemble a malacha, it's problematic. In other words, the question here is that do we view this as making an oil that's temporary, or b'chlal not? It's considered not even making a temporary oil. The only reason why it's asur is because it's called uvda dechoil. And now that we mentioned this whole concept of suspending a strainer, so says the Gemara, second to top line in the Amid, that mankid Abaya chumre masnisa v'tani. Abaya collected and he grouped, he put together similar rulings in the Mishnah, and he taught them all together, which is a din of hagoid. We're going to have this also, guys, on Kuf Lamed Ches Amud Beis today, so help up. Hagoid is some sort of leather bag. And Rashi explains that when people will travel and they had with them milk or wine, a liquid that they wanted that liquid to retain its freshness, they would have these sorts of leather bags, and there would also be strings in it. And as we'll see today on Amid Beis, that the goyd that Abai is talking about is dafke, that the strings are not set into the bag. We'll speak about this more in Amid Beis. And what would they do at night when they would sleep? When they went to lay down, they would open up the bag to its maximum capacity, and they would suspend every edge of this leather bag on a different peg. In other words, that this keli was completely opened. And why would they leave it open overnight? Because they wanted that whatever is in there, whether it is the wine, whether it is the milk, to be properly exposed to the wind. Wind is blowing in the top, wind is blowing in the bottom, in order for it to retain its freshness. What would be the problem with opening up a bag very strongly? The issue here is of oil aray. It's an oil aray. You're not intending, so to say, to make an oil underneath it, but when something is really stretched out and open, de facto, you're creating a temporary oil. Or the hamishameres, the next din Abaye brought, which is the din of our Mishnah, right? Again, you're putting something on a keli to use it as a strainer. But when you properly stretch it out all around the circumference of the keli, again, it's an oil aray. That's the way we'll learn over here. It's connected uvda dechol to oil aray. And the din of a kila. A kila is a canopy. People would have over their beds, they would have poles protruding up, over which they would put some sort of garment, which would create a canopy over their beds. Here also we have an issue of oil aray and the kisa galin. Kisa galin is some sort of chair or some sort of bed that was disassembled and assembled. And whenever they would move it from one place to the other, they would disassemble it and reassemble it. Now, when you reassemble a chair or a bed, again, you're creating some sort of oil underneath it. All of that, Abaye found between Mishnayos, between Braises, that indeed lo yasa, that Chazal prohibited it, right? Whether it is considered uvda dechol, whether it's considered oil aray, whether it's considered MERCAVA patish by the bed, that's a big topic by each one, a big discussion. However, in all of them, Abaye emphasized none of them will be yasa d'oraisa. It's only the imasa, pater, avolasa. However, says Abaye, oil aray, oil keva, but making a permanent tent, lo yaseh ve'imasa chayiv chatos. Avol, continues Abaye, when it comes to a mitzvah, when it comes to a bed, now it was very common that during the daytime, a person were to take his bed and he were to stand it up, or we would call it maybe put it up on its side, so it should occupy less space on the ground. So now the question is, guys, when you put it back down on its 4 feet, you're also creating an oil. But one can argue that. Here we'll see there's no problem. Or the kisei teraskol is a folding chair. We have folding chairs. Think about it. Every time you open up a folding chair, you're creating some sort of oil aray underneath it. And the asla is similar to a folding chair, but it was used as a toilet seat. Like by us, you pick it up, you put it down. So here Abaye says, mutar linatoisan lechatchila, you are allowed to set them up lechatchila on Shabbos, because they are considered, guys, here are the words, they're considered pre-constructed. And this even goes to the folding chair. Unlike the case above where we spoke about taking apart a bed, putting together, assembling a bed, which is taka asur because of oil aray or because of MERCAVA patish, but something that's already built, like a folding chair, it's already considered constructed. Your kavana is not to create an oil underneath it. That's a very important detail here. But unlike, we'll speak about the kilo, we're going to learn a lot about the kilo, this canopy. And therefore, you are lechatchila allowed to open and close it, or to put your bed down and to pick it up. Because guys, don't forget, anything that you may not assemble because of an oil, even if it's only midrabanan, automatically you may not disassemble, right? Also midrabanan. So you are allowed to move it both ways, so says Abaye. Okay, we're going to come back to many details, but now the Gemara is going to conclude the second detail of the Mishnah, and that is, can you, if it was already placed, can you use it? So Rabbi Eliezer holds that you can use it even on Shabbos, which is a big finish. The Chachamim say on Yom Tov, yeah, because this is mamash fruit, guys, actual food preparation. Everyone agrees that on Yom Tov you are allowed to do. Question is, what about on Shabbos? So the Mishnah says that the Chachamim hold that the Einois L'Toloi b'Shabbos. Says the Gemara, she made my. Here again, if a person did strain wine through this strainer, what is he violating? So Amarav Kahana, Shimed, here, Chayiv Chatos. Maskav Lord Avsheshes. Well, it makes sense. I mean, your mamash, you're doing an act of sifting or you're doing an act of selecting, but to have a machloikis in a Mishnah, min akotza el akotza, is something that we don't find. But Rabbi Eliezer holds you're allowed to do it mutter. So it says, Rav Sheshes mi can be done that the Rabbanan mechai v'chatas, the Rabbi Eliezer shari lechatchila, the shitas are too far apart. So therefore, because of Rabbi Eliezer's leniencies, based on whatever, it would make more sense that the Chachamim say it's also midrabban. Maskiv lo Rabbi Yosef, alam aloi. What? This is not the only time we had this above. Harei ir shel zahav, right? Daf nun tes, right? In the sugya of hoitzah. So there was some sort of ornament that had in it protruding or engraved the city line of Yerushalayim. And the question is whether a woman is allowed to wear it outside in the Rosh Hashanah. Rav Meir says Yechayev Chatos for wearing it. It's considered the bona fide carrying. And Rabbi Eliezer shari lechatchila. So there we do find the machlokes merakotza lakotza. And says the Gemara Mayi the Tanya says in Abraisa lo seitze isha be'ir shel zav clearly ve'im yitzah chayeves chatos the Rav Meir the Chachamim hold somewhere in between lo seitze ve'im yitzah ptura. And Rabbi Eliezer holds lachatchila yoytza isha be'ir shel zav lachatchila. So we do see a machlokes merakotza lakotza. To which Amalei Abaya, don't bring that as an example of a machlokes mamish menakotza lakotza because it's not correct, because there we take out three opinions. Chayv chatos also midrabanan mutar lachatchila. Mi savrat says Abaya Rabbi Eliezer ad Rav Meir Kohen. Right, we don't only have these two opinions in either extremes. Right, that Rav Meir says chayeves chatos, and on that says Rabbi Eliezer mutar. That's not the case, as we just read in the Braisa. Rabbi Eliezer made his comment only after the Tana already quoted the Chachamim, ad Rabbanan Kohen. The Rabbanan hold Pater Rav Elasid. The Amar Lahu Iyu, and Rabbi Eliezer tells the Chachamim, Muter lechatchila. But we don't find a machlokes menakotza lakotza. However, that doesn't refute the sheet of Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana does hold that what? That the Chachamim hold that if you strained wine through that strainer, you are indeed chayav chatos. Now, if you remember on Daf Ayin Gimel, the Gemara pointed out how we have many avos mentioned in the Mishnah that are relatively very, very similar. And the Gemara asked, why do we count them separately? So the Gemara answered that which was in the Mishnah and was chashiva, we count separately. Like Zoyra, winnowing is also separating the shaft from the kernel. Boirer, selecting. Merakate, sifting. They are all similar, but they are different avos. So now the Gemara is asking, Mishumai Masrinon Bey. And according to many Rishonim, right, this is the base of Shitas Tosfos Rid that we mentioned above, that when you give a person Asra'ah, you have to mention the specific Av that they are about to violate. Now, not everyone subscribes to that, and they're gonna learn this Gemara obviously differently. But according to these Rishonim, it's a simple question. So in other words, now that we established L'Rav Kahana, that if a person is going to pour the wine through this oil arai type of sifter, that's on top of your keli, your chayiv chatos, what av must you mention for the person taka to be chayiv? Now we're not speaking about chatos, we're speaking about for a person, God forbid, to get skilo. You have to tell him exactly. You can't tell him you're not allowed to do it. You got to tell him for what av. So it says the Gemara machlokes. Rabbi says mishum boirer. Adds Rashi a very important detail. Boirer doesn't mean only boirer. Guys, this is called, no doubt, merakit. Merakit is sifting. What you're doing is an act of sifting because you have a sifter, right? You have a mishameres. Rabba is machadesh that you can also include this in boirer azoy zakrashi. Tahai nami boireru. Rabbi Zayda says, no, this is only included in merakit and sifting. Now we're going to go back and forth. That this is also considered boirer. Why is that? Guys, shocking words. Just like boirer. The isser of boirer is is taking the food out of the waste. We know that's not correct. But let's just read the words. That is what boirer is. Because when you sift, what happens in this type of sifting, in most types of siftings, the shaft falls through and the legume stays on top. The kitnia stay on top. Here, the good goes on the bottom. That's called, you're taking the oichel, you're leaving the psoilus. So therefore, it's like boirer. Boom. So 1 second, what are we talking about? We should remember, because boirer is such a relevant av when we come to eat. So we were taught, remember that whole sugya? the three hetadim that we need for a person to be allowed to eat food taking oichel meteichab soilus. One of them is that when you take oichel from soilus, you're not doing an act of boider. Fakir boider is when you take the bad out of the good. Now we learned that bad really means that which you don't want right now is called bad. So how does that go together with this Gemara that Mamish is saying the opposite? So on Daf Ayin Dalid, when we learned to Sugi of boider, Tosfos quoted here Kuf Lamed Ches, and Tosfos says something very important. It depends when you're eating something, or when you have something in front of you, what's in the majority, what's in the minority. People normally want to do what is less work, not what's more work. So when you have more food than waste, there is where normally what would you do? You would take out the psilus. Then taking out the psilus is the darkoi, and the heter will be to take the oichel metreichab psilus because you're doing something unusual. But whenever you have a scenario where there's more psilus than oichel, and that's the way Tosfos says that the wine that we are referring to, the wine for which you have to pour through the sifter, there is more dregs than wine. There are a lot of dregs. Whenever you have more psilus than oichel, then the way of separating will be, again, doing the least work, is by taking out the oichel meteichab psilus. Like over here, and that's the case over here, when there's more dregs than wine, then the way the darkoi of boired is taking the oichel from the psilus, and that's the chiyuv. And since you are doing that over here, says the Rabbi, you can also call this an act of boired. However, Amalei Abzeda, Kavasadi Mistabra, no. Ma darkoi shall meraket. Psilus milmaila oichel milmaton. That's what happened when you sift. I'm sorry, but that's by the legumes. Hachinami psilus milmaila and the oichel lamata. So it is an act of sifting. And Rashi says, I'm reading inside Rashi towards the end of the narrow lines, Masha Enkin by boired kitnius, that the psilus goes lamata. So therefore, it cannot be included in boired. But again, it's very important to note that Rashi holds that the Rabbi is not saying that this is not called meraket. Rashi is saying that this can also be called an act of boired. Now, Tosfos does not hold that when you give a hasra, you have to mention this specific av. So he quotes this Gemara. What do you do with this Gemara? Like, what's the question? The Gemara says the words mishumai masrin on bay. So Tosfos says beautiful. When you give hasra, you can say it says leisasa kol malacha. You're violating Shabbos. You don't have to mention the av. But if you mention an av, you cannot mention the wrong av. That's the word. That's Gemara. And that's the question. So what is considered the wrong av? And that's why you have a machlokas amarim. Okay, guys, now we're going to go back a lot to construction, to making an oil out of it. Says the Gemara, Tani Rami Bar Yechezkel. Talis kafula lo yaser. If you have a talis, right, and you want to fold it over various chairs in order to make a covering for that which is underneath it, you may not do so. Guys, many of our children do this on Shabbos. It's good to know this Gemara, right? They play a game, they make a tent, right? They take a blanket, they put a chair here, they put a chair there. That's exactly what this Gemara is referring to. It's not an Easter Doraisa, right? You're not leaving it, whatever Arai means, whatever Keva means. Let's go with the 24 hours. You're not leaving it for 24 hours, but Midrash, that's what we're saying. You may not make an oil Arai. They also However, if you have already that blanket or that cover that is attached to the frame by a rope, by a cord, let's speak today, guys, it's very common in certain places where you have skylights and you also have some sort of shade, not wanting the sun to come in, right? And you can open and close it. Don't make a mistake by saying it's asur midrabanan. It's not asur midrabanan, because since that oil it's already there, and it's connected with the chut or with the mashiach. It's connected there already. So here we're going to call this as you are only adding to the oil arai. That's something that's permitted. I think when we learned the Gemara on Daf Kuf Mevchei, we mentioned a very common thing when you have a stroller, and there's a top of the stroller. It's standing up. It's bunched up, but it's already there. When you're going to open it, You're not attaching anything. You're not even throwing anything over. You're just extending something that was previously already attached, but closed up or bunched up. That's permitted. That's permitted. That's what the Gemara is saying.
Isn't an umbrella the same?
So to know that the first one that wrote about an umbrella is the Noida Yehuda, and you should know that in those days, we're going back 300 years, there was a big machloikas hapoiskim, and we consider this a minig that we took upon ourselves not to use. And I'll tell you, the minig is really chamur, because it's not only that we do not open an umbrella, and again, you can argue that the umbrella is like the folding chair, all right? But more than that, we have a minig that we don't use an umbrella, even if the umbrella was fully open before Shabbos. And that, as we'll see when it comes to the general sugar of oil, if the oil was open, like we have in front of our shul, you know, the tent, they stand in front, they shouldn't be hot on Shabbos, you can move that. It's like we mentioned, it's like putting the bed down. Anything that's already constructed, even though you're moving its location, is mutter. So they were arguing earlier on that if an umbrella was open from before Shabbos, if not for the hoitzah issue, like there's an eruv, you should be allowed to use it. The minig is not to use it. I'm just saying. Okay. And a lot. There were many chuvas written about the umbrella. Okay. Let me just go back to the stroller. They're also common. So many people, they open up the stroller. The stroller has a hood. But then sometimes you put a blanket on top of that because you don't want anything to come in. You know, that might be a problem. According to we're not paskening. We're just saying that in other words, anything that was connected, not a problem to open it. If something is not connected, even if it is temporary, you're doing it as a covering. That's what we're learning about over here. And we're not learning Shulchan Aruch, but it's gavaldic to see how many, this is like a very practical daf. Look at the next case. The people used to have canopies on their beds. You know, today we have screens that don't allow mosquitoes in. I know in Brazil, that's the most common thing. They call it a mosquiteiro. They call it that which will prevent you getting beaten up by mosquitoes. All right? Can you open it up or not? So Armalei, now based on what we learned right now, you know what it would come out? If the canopy was not connected, you had the poles and you have to throw over that canopy, it would be asim midrabanan, based on what we're learning. If the canopy was already connected with strings to the poles, you're just opening it and closing it, it should be mutter. Here, when they asked Rav, every time he said something else. One time he said asim. He didn't say asim. That would be simple. He said, Rav answered, even a bed, even setting up a bed is asim. So then at another time they asked him, can we set up a bed? And either it means to assemble a bed or just means putting a bed down. And he said, Afkila muteres. Then one time they asked him explicitly both. Kila umita mahu, amalei, kila asura mita muteres. You know, couldn't even be it happened at the same time. That's a great teacher. He's keeping everyone on their toes. So how do it's mamish is contradicting himself. So the Gemara explains, well, like Asha. What type of bed may you not put down? It's not a bed that's already completely built, and all you're doing is that you're putting it from a standing position to a laying position. It's the karminoy, like the beds of the place of the karminoyim, which is exactly the bed that we spoke about on top of the amid. Like we said, it's some sort of a kisei shel galin. It's a bed of galin. You have to assemble, and I know that you're not assembling, you're not affixing it strong. It's not makam patish. It's not binyan, because it's very temporary and it's not firm, but it's called making some sort of oil aray. That's any canopy that is already prior to Shabbos attached partially with strings to the beams. All you're doing is you're opening it and closing it, but it's already attached. That's not a problem. And when he said kila asura umita muteres, says the Gemara, that's kididon. That was the normal kila in the days of Chazal, is that the shmata that they would put over the sticks were b'chlal not attached with strings, which is why that, putting it on Friday night is asur. The beds in the times of Chazal were like our beds. You didn't have to build them at all. They were already completely assembled. All they did is they had very little homes, is that during the day they would pick the bed up. All you're doing is putting it down. That's mutaris.
They're called Murphy beds.
Thank you, Murphy beds. He got it. Look how that became a Murphy. That was amazing. Omar Rav Yosef. I saw that in the house of Rav Huna, that the Me'urt and the Gidu, I saw that in the evening they were spread open. They were put down. In other words, one thing again clear: any act that cannot be done in the building, midrabanan, that same cannot be undone midrabanan. Right? You can't build, you can't dismantle. Boina and Soisa. So the fact that in their household, Friday night they were up. Now, when they were up Friday night, maybe they set it up before Shabbos. But I gesehen that Shabbos morning they were opened up. Is that ayah? This is all a proof. And don't forget, guys, we learned so many times that Rav Huna was a Talmud of Rav, right? But not a problem. Even Rav said that if it was attached with strings, you can open and close it. Amar Rav in the name of Rav Chia. Viloin. Viloin is a curtain, not an oil. Oil is when you are putting a covering. Here you're putting up a mechitza. Now, if it's a wall, it's a problem. But if you're simply putting up a mechitza for tznius, here a mechitza aray is mutter, even midrabanan, mutter, nachanes, right? In other words, when we have in the shul, and we have a shul, our mechitzas are pre-assembled. But what happens, more people come and you have a frame and you want to throw over a psashmata or something to make a mechitza. According to this, it's mutter. Vilen, mutter lenatoisai, or mutter leparkai, even if you don't have strings attached. No, it's the issue of an oil is dafke by an oil. By a mechitza, we are more lenient. There's no issue with mechitza aray. Omar Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Chia, turn to Daf Kuf Lamed Chesamet Beis, more details about the canopy. Kilas Hassanim, a kila that was used for a bridal bed. And as we have this so many times, most kilas in the times of Chazal were put over a bed that had 4 sticks protruding upwards. Every corner of the bed had a stick going up, which means that when you would spread the canopy over it, it would form a proper oil. What is the minimum size of a cover? We just said a mechitza is okay. A wall is okay for tznius. A wall. A covering is also. What's a covering? A tefach. Tefach by tefach. Now imagine if you have a bed and instead of having 4 sticks coming up, you only have 2 in the center, north, center, south. So when you put something on top of it, it's called a tipi. It goes all the way up to a point, right? Like a upside down V or an A without the line in the middle. So since the top does not have a tefach, so what did you do? You made a mechitza. We just said that a mechitza's aray is not a problem, even if it wasn't any strings attached. So based on that, kilos chasanim, muter lenatoisa, and automatically it goes together, umuter leparka. Now hold on, guys. Now we're going to learn a couple of gewaldige dinim of lavud, and we're going to learn a gewaldige question about when I spread my cover over my bed on Shabbos, and I'm allowed to make my room neat on Shabbos, for Shabbos. Here I'm creating, if my blanket goes over the bed on both sides and goes down, so that's going to be walls. And again, walls you can create, but here it's maybe that will render the bottom of my bed as a roof, because now there's walls. Now you got a whole room under your bed. We're going to deal about this all now. Mamish Gamal. So Amar Rav Sheshes B'nei Ravidi, Lo Yamar on this kula, since there's no tefach on the top. There's no oil part, it's only a mechitza part. Mechitzas aray is muter, is ella she'ein begago tefach. First of all, that's key number 1. Abel yesh begago tefach, the meaning of an oil doesn't have to be humongous. 1 tefach, then it's asura. Midrabanan. Oyalari, also midrabanan. Furthermore, the chi ein begago tefach, even if the tip itself is pointy, nama lo yamaran, that it's permitted. Ella she'ein bepachus mishloishu samoch ligago tefach. It's only if the width does not amount to a tefach within 3 tefachim from the roof. Halk up, guys. So here is my kilas chasanim. Now, if it's going to steep down if it's going to come down very steep, that's good. That means if I'm going down, even when I hit 3 tefachim, milmaila lamata, at that point, there isn't yet the width of a tefach because it's coming down very steep. That's good. If there's going to be a width. Now, there's no oil there. We're just speaking about the space in between both sides. if before you went down 3 tefachim, it opens up not so steep, it opens up wider. There's already the width between one wall and the other wall of a tefach, based on the rule of lavud, Now the top has a point. Elamad, the point on the top is not a tefach wide. But if we bring it down, if we make halachically bring it down, if we view that tip on the top as coming down, then you do have an oil tefach. Amazing. So you will apply the concept of lavud lechumra, rendering this into an oil aray. That's one step. And because of lavud asr, we're not done yet. Then he writes another din. The law yamaran, right, that if it does come down very steep, you don't have the width between wall and wall of a tefach within 3, you're good. Is ella she'ein b'shipua tefach, aval yesh b'shipua tefach. You have to now look right at the base, at the bottom of on the bed, when it comes all the way down to the bed. Now, then they would have various canopies coming down, because you think our beds are wider than a tefach. But if there was a piece that all the way down by the bed, you also don't want for there to be a tefach of width. Aval yesh b'shipua tefach. Now, hold on. What? There's no lavud here. There is no lavud here. But we're going into a whole different topic. And here's the topic, my friends. Let me go back to my teepee. Right? A house is comprised of walls and a roof. When you go into a teepee, right? You go into it. When you look, what do you call the sides? A wall or a roof? Maybe call it a roof. Why are you calling it a wall? Is it not serving you as a roof? And a mechitza is muter midrabanan. Anything that's slanted, b'chlal, it can be considered a roof. Now, this is a question that's negeya in al sukkah, because a sukkah has to have the funnels. The funnels are very lenient, but then a sukkah has to have a roof. The roof has to be made out of schach. So what's going to happen if you have a tipi in a sukkah? So there's a machlokas tanoim as to when to define the wall as a wall, when to define the wall as a roof. Our Gemara is following a shita that the moment if you have between and the bottom, in between the 2 walls, if you have a tefach, wow, we consider it the whole thing a roof. Both walls are roofs. And if they're going to become roofs, vita you made an oil array. So we're really limiting the heter of kilas chasanim, and it must have been that when they had a kilas chasanim, they didn't have one canopy that went on the whole bed, because are you kidding? What they had is they had various of them coming down. And the width of each one cannot be a tefach. And now another detail. I'm sorry. We just read that. Right? Then we say we are subscribing to the shita and sukkah that shipu'ei ahalim ka'ahalim dami, that we view it not as a wall but as a roof. And the moment it's a roof, it's asam edrabanan. And finally, we don't want for this canopy to go under, to go lower than the bed 1 tefach. But the moment it goes under the bed as a tefach, automatically it becomes asur. Why does it become asur? Because then, kolzman, you have a bed laying on the ground, even though you can argue that if you go under the bed, then you're under an oil. We don't consider a bed an oil at all. We do not consider the bed as an oil, because the bed was not laid down for it to create an oil for that which is underneath it. No, the bed was laid down for it to be a base for you that's going to go over it. But if you build walls, and now someone is able to go under the bed and not only have a roof, but have the privacy of walls, this will now render, the problem is not the mechitza, the problem is this renders the floor of the bed as an oil for underneath it. So jump all of the Rishonim. Does that mean that if you make your bed on Shabbos, that if your blanket, right, is a little bit wider than the bed and it goes down on each side of tefach, are you violating an Isur D'Rabbanan of making your bed into an oil for that which is underneath it? Say the Rishonim, no, because when you put your blanket on your bed, your kavanah is to cover your bed. Your kavanah is not to create an oil. But a canopy, you are creating an oil. Now, halachically, yeah, there's no tefach, and there's no width, and there's no width, there's no tehei. But when you put up something l'shem oil, even if it doesn't have the halachic definition of an oil because it's lacking the tefach v'chulei, but if now, because of your kavanah, it will render what is underneath the bed into an oil arai if it goes further down than the sides of the beds. Wow. So basically what we did is that it's not so pashut when it comes to the kilas chasanim. Now all of this is resolved if the canopy was tied to the beams partially from before Shabbos. Then b'chlal we're not concerned because then you're only being moisiv on an oil arai, which is not a problem. All right. V'omar Rav Sheishis b'rei Ravidi, Hi Siyana, when they were learning the sugya, guys, when we grew up in the Tafshin Mems, the minig by us was that the Borsalino hats had a brim aligned with the golos. Changes. Siyana is a hat that the brim is a tefach or more. So he says that Haisi, you can wear it on Shabbos. Now they thought that Rav Sheishis, B'rei Ravidi, was Keilu addressing, maybe when you put it on, you're putting on an oil arai, and he said it's good. So first of all, he said it's good. And then v'ha'itmer siyana asur. So the first resolution was, like Asher, when is it asur if it has a tefach? Oil arai. Now this is really problematic, like I mentioned, because if the oil is already built from before, like think about a tent that you have in your backyard, right? You can move it on Shabbos. So that, and it's not going to jive with this, but we'll hold on. So they thought, no, if there's a tefach, you can't put it on because oil arai. And when it says, when Rav Sheisha says, Siyana Shari is the nose tefach, the Gemara says, Elama'ato, Sharbev, Bigalima tefach, Chinami the Mechayiv. By the way, Mechayiv doesn't mean Mechayiv. It means Chinami the Asr writes the side, right? So he brings from the Rush. If a person has what they call today a hoodie, but the hoodie is not the minig of today's hoodies. It's something that if you throw it over your head, it could protrude for a tefach. But garments that protrude over your head or further than you had a tefach, is that a isur de rabbanan? Of course not. You're wearing clothing. You're not doing anything. Indeed, there is no problem. You can wear a hat with a brim as long as you want. There's no issue with oil. There's a whole other issue. Garments that have big hats that have big brims, and you're walking down or up Kingston Avenue in New York City, as a blasta vint, many times the hat can fall off. So we were learning that there's an isur midrabanan for you to wear a garment, that there is a certain likelihood, a certain limit halachically where it will get blown off, because if it gets blown off, then you might come to carry it. Again, we're not learning Shulchan Aruch, but that's what the issue of the large, now the larger the brim, the easier it is for the wind to blow it off. When we learned that it's mutter, that's Rav Sheishis is the mihadak. It can be a very wide brim, but it was a certain type of hat that they would tie onto the bottom of their chins or behind their ears or some other, it was fastened, it was tightly on the person's head. There was no fear that it's going to get blown off. Maybe it goes to all hats today. Today it's made very tight, you can put it on tight. The issur is that if there's a, whatever that number of percent is, a garment that might get blown off enough, the might is a big might enough, you got to issur the rabbanan because you might come to carry it. Beautiful. Easy is a lashon chiba. Tell me, my dear friend, Hanach Milyam Al Yasa the Amrat Lon B'Shmei Derav. Shiur with us, Epis, you once told us 2 gewaltige chidushim from Rav, 3 chidushim. 2 of them was regarding Shabbos, and 1 was regarding Torah itself. I forgot what they were. Please share it with us. Shalach lei, these denim. Number 1 is Hadatanya. We learned this in the beginning of today's daf. Goid bikisna. Goid bikisna means a leather bag that's hung on its strings. Again, when they would go to sleep, they would really open it up in order for air to properly circulate over and under whatever was in it, and that was to keep it fresh. So here again, the issue is that when you stretch it out to open it up, first of all, you're only doing it for the night. Start with that. So if anything, it's an oil arai. But is it an oil arai or not? So we learned in a Tanach that muter l'natoisa b'Shabbos. All right. However, by the way, before we go on, we learned Tanach Aleph. Abaya quoted already that it's asur. So the Rishonim say that it depends. It's about how tight do you open it up. Anything that's really opened up very tight, that is where there's an issue of an oil arai. If you don't even open it up tight, so it's bechlal not shaykh to the whole concept of an oil, and then there's not even a problem with the Rabbanan. So when we learned on Amud Aleph that you're not allowed to do it, that is that they did not tie it with its strings, or the strings were not affixed into it. If the strings are not affixed into it, then they, fearing that it would fall off the pegs, they would tie it tighter to the pegs. That's where there's an issue. That is what Abaye was talking about. Here, we're speaking about this type of goyd that they would tie it with the strings that was affixed into the leather pouch. And because the strings were part of it, they never needed to tie it that tightly. And that's why it's mutter. And on that, that's only true if two people are, or more. When two people tie it up at the same time, right? Imagine when you go to one side and then you have to leave it hanging, and then you go to the other side. For it to work, when you tie it yourself on one side, you have to tie it tighter. It's about tying it tightly. So when two people are doing it together, they won't even tie it that tightly, especially since the strings are affixed in it. So therefore, since they're not fully opening it up, that's where it's mutter. That was Rav's Chiddush. Abel ba'adam echad, a practical din, and you're going from one peg to the other. That means for a moment, it's going to be, all of its weight is going to be on one peg. And for it not to fully, you have to tightly tie it. That is considered making an oil out. And Rav says, not like it says in the Braisa, it's going to be yasser. Now that we mentioned this tight or not, when it comes to a canopy that was not prior to Shabbos tied with strings, don't come and tell me that the whole issue of canopies is only right when it's Adam Echad. No, that was Rav. We accept Rav, but that's only by the goy. By the canopy, even if 10 people are putting up the canopy, it's going to be usher, because there's no doubt that at least in one part on the top of the canopy, it's going to be fully stretched out, which is the issue of an oil. Number one. Then number two, Rav Idach Mayim, the Tanya. Listen to this, Kiran oven. One of the legs broke off. So now, what do we have? What's it, guys? Let's help up. What is a oven? An oven is a kli shemalach toile iser. We're going to follow the shita, which kli shemalach toile iser may be moved to tzarach mekayimai. Says the Braisa that even though one leg fell off, we're speaking about an oven that's standing on 4 legs. Something that was made to stand on 4 legs could stand on 3 legs. So therefore, it's not batul mitoiras keli. It still remains a keli shemalach toile iser, and therefore mutal taltala tzarach mekayimai. Right. But shtayim, that means 2 legs broke off, it can't stand at all. Now we view this oven as a non-oven. It's a non-keli. A non-keli has a higher level of muktzah. It may not be moved to tzarech mekayimai. That is the Braisa. And on that, right, second to last, narrow line, Rav Omar, afilu chad nami yasir. I hold that even if only 1 leg fell off, you may not move it. Because you might properly insert that broken leg into it, and then whether it is called binyan, or if you're going to say this is an oven and ain't binyan b'kelim, it's going to be MERCAVA patish. So if I can't tear it out, was machna. So that's the 2 dinim of Shabbos. And the 3rd din, now we're going into Agadah to Torah. The Amarav, first white line, this is very shocking words, that Asida Torah shetishtachach mi Yisrael, that there'll be a time that Torah will be forgotten. First of all, this is a pasuk. Shenemar, as it says in Pashas Kisavon, that v'hifla Hashem es makoischa Hashem, right, will give the Jewish people extraordinary pele blows, and says Chazal hafla ozu en yidei amahu. However, when it says in Yeshaya that lachein hineni Yosef lahafli is amazeh hafle v'ofela, and the ikid is the hemshach hapasuk here where it says that v'avda chachmas chachamav. Ubinas nevoinav tistator, clearly, and there the Torah uses the words hafle v'ofela, that we will forget our chachma and our bina if we first are forgetting the Torah. The Marsha says that this duplis lashon in the pasuk hafle v'ofela, or chachmas chachamav ubinas nevoinav, means that we're going to forget both the nigla and the nistet, as we'll explain in a moment. Now, so says the Gemara. From there we know have a oimed that the pasuk in Yeshaya is megala, that the pasuk in Kisavai v'hifla Hashem es makoischa means Torah. In other words, God forbid there'll be a time that we will forget the Torah. Now, well, hold on. What does that mean? Tana Rabbana, and we'll see nach the Marsha, nigla and nisted. We're going to forget a certain nisted. We're going to forget a certain ruchniisdika concept in the Torah, and therefore one halacha will go into that. which is terrible. We're just limiting what it doesn't sound. It sounds, God forbid, a terrible thing. And they saw the beauty of people learning Torah. They already foresaw. So Amru, they said, Asida Torah shetishtakach mi Yisrael. And they quoted the pasuk in Amos. Shenemar as it says, Hine yomim boim ne'um Hashem Elokim. Days are coming, says Hashem Elokim, that vishlachti rav wa'aretz, I God am going to send a hunger to the land. Loy rav la'lechem, not a hunger for bread. Loy tzalamayim, not thirst for water. Ki'im l'shmoyes divrei Hashem. Guys, it's amazing how we, which is a good thing, we transform everything to good. Right? When I grew up, there was a niggin, not a Lubavitch, a beautiful melody singing these words. And when I heard this as a child, it sounded like the greatest thing, that people, right before Mashiach, they'll be hungering and thirsting for ruchnias. And by the way, it is a great thing. But the pshat, it always happens, but it's good to know that the pshat is the opposite. The pshat means that it's like a curse, that there'll be a time that people won't have the bread and the water, we'll lose it. So the man will thirst for it. That depends how you look at it. So in the Hanami, we can look at it in a positive way, but this is brought in the context of this terrible thing that we're going to forget Torah. And it says, Vic says, that v'no miyam ad yom, that we're going to journey from sea to sea, u'mitzafay v'ad mizrachi shoytetu, and we're going to wander from north until east. There's my motto, north to east, right? Shouldn't it be from north to south? Or good, levakesh es dvar Hashem, v'lo yimtza'u. And they won't find it. I mean, you can say al derech tzachos, Safin is America. Torah used to be in America. And Mizrach is Eretz Yisrael. No matter where, no matter to which Torah center you're going to go, but Lavak is Dvar Hashem v'lo yimtzu. Now, which Dvar Hashem won't you find? So he says Dvar Hashem means halacha. Halacha will be hard to find. Dvar Hashem is the Kates. See this now. When is finally going to be the end of Golus? They go to North America, they don't know. They go to the Mizrach, they don't know. And Dvar Hashem is Nevuah. That will also not be found. Says the Gemara, "Mai yishaytu lavakesh Dvar Hashem," and this is really connected to Rav's statement that Asida Torah shetishtakach, that Amru, what's going to happen when they enter Koren B'Yavna? Asida Isha, there's going to come a time that a woman will come. Shetitol kikar shel truma, she's going to take a loaf of bread. That is truma dika bread, which means that you have to eat it betara. If it's tama, you may not eat it. And v'tachse b'batei mekinesiyos. And she's going to ask Leda im tamehi im tohirihi, whether it's tamei or tor. The ein maven, and people won't know your gewalt. That is what we're going to forget. We're going to forget a detail of tum and tar. Asks the Gemara, how can we forget that? Im tohirihi im tamehi. We'll never forget that. You know why? Because behedrik sivbeit, it says in the pasuk, because ha'ochel asher yei ochel. All right, and that's like a pasuk in the Chumash. That's speaking about a oven, a klecheres, that only becomes tamei if the source of tuma enters the inside of it. But even if it enters the inside of it, it doesn't have to touch its inner walls. It only has to enter its air space. And the food that's in it, the pasuk says is tamei. So that will know. Ella, what will we not know? Leda im d'sheni hivim shnehi. We don't know whether the bread is a rishon or a sheni. Now, guys, like this, a sheretz, which is the case of the pasuk in Shmini, is an av. An av that enters the airspace of an oven. What does the oven become? A rishon. No one debates that. The question that we will not know is bread that's in the oven. What is the din of that bread? Is the bread the rishon or a sheni? Now, why would you say this? Why would you say that, guys? Here is a nigla that's contingent on a very subtle nister dika ruchnius dika concept, and now we'll appreciate better what's the calamity of forgetting this Torah being forgotten. When you say that the bread is tummy, I have two ways of looking at it. One way of looking at it is that the sheretz, right, is only MERCAVA the airspace. Airspace is not tangible. The airspace is now a rishon, right? Sheretz is an av. The airspace is a rishon, and now the bread is a sheni. Or, which is why you're going to get confused, airspace is too luftik, it's too non-tangible to become tummy. So why is it that if a sheretz enters the airspace of an oven, why is everything in their tummy? Because halachically we view the sheretz to be inflated and everywhere in the oven. Now, if we were to view the sheretz being all everywhere in the oven, so then everything in there, Ke'ilu, was touching the sheretz. and then everything in there should become a rishon. Now, this is of tremendous significance. I know I'm getting ahead of myself inside the Gemara, but this is the Nikud over here. When people are more ruchniistic, they are open to the concept that airspace, which is a non-tangible thing, is still a thing. We're more ruchniistic. Not everything is about can you touch it or not. And indeed, that's the din, that the airspace becomes tamei, and then it's matame, the food. The food is takasheni. Means people are going to become more coarse, and they're not going to appreciate that the avira itself can be tummy. No, if something in the oven is tummy, that must be because halachically it's the sheretz is everywhere. And if that will be the case, then the bread is a rishon. But the problem is that people will forget or they'll lose this nisterdika, this ruchnisdika sensibility that the environment itself can be tummy, and that's the end of the world. You know, sometimes you go into an environment, and there's nothing halachically wrong in this environment, not tangible, but the airspace itself is chazer treif. That will be forgotten. Now let's read it inside over here. Oh, so the Gemara says, even that, Hanami masnisani. Why will we forget it? It's written in the Mishnah. It says clearly in the Mishnah that the pas is a shniya, because the Talmud is only tchila means it's a rishon. Says the Gemara, even though it's a Mishnah, they're not going to appreciate it. They're going to challenge it. Like Rav Ada already challenged and asked Rabbi, I don't understand the Mishnah. Why don't we say, let us view the oven, let us view that the oven is filled with the sheretz. The sheretz is taking up all the space in the oven. Again, we're not open to appreciating that air space itself. It's a non-thing thing. A non-thing thing is what we're going to get confused with. And therefore, to have a positive shayna. So Amalei, we know clearly that we don't say that. And as that Braisa clearly writes that Yochel you what happens if there's a keli inside that kleicheres? Is it tummy or not? It's very simple, my friends. Remember the rule. A keli does not become a sheni. If we were to view the sheretz as the sheretz itself is filling up all the airspace of the oven, then not only will the pas be a rishon, but then a keli in there will become tummy. And here we learned from a pasuk that a keli will not become tummy. And Chazal learned only food becomes tummy. And why will kalim not become tamei? Because we don't say that the sheretz is there everywhere. No, the sheretz is not everywhere. The avir is like it's a non-entity built in mitzias nimsa, and that becomes tamei. And now that's tamei rishon, whatever it will affect will go down another notch. Food can become a sheni, a keli cannot become a sheni, but this detail is what we're going to forget. Because we're going to lose our delicate ruchniistic grasp that something that's not a thing is still a thing. Things will become too tangible. Says the Gemara on that. Tanya Rashbi Oimer. And don't forget that Rashbi looks at the pnimius of a yid. Our neshama will never lose that sensibility. Never. So he says, Chas v'sholem shetishtaka chayim Yisrael. And as he quotes a pasuk, and Vayelach, none of the Torah will be forgotten. The pasuk in almost that Yeshaytu to Lavakash is Dvar Hashem Elohim. So no, it's the pasuk in Sava he doesn't even address. The Hifla Hashem is Makoischa means corona. Who says it means something ruchni? However, Elohim so means that Kuflametes that during the Golos we will never find a halacha berura. Guys, Rashi halacha berura means we will never clearly know the reason behind the halacha. The halachas we're not going to forget, but the reasons behind it we'll forget. Nor will there be a Mishnah berura b'makom echad, nor will we have a clear nusach, a clear text in one place. And that is we're going to be searching. And the Ben Yehoyada says that's also a bracha. A bracha came from it. What's the bracha from it? That the moment you don't have a halacha berura b'makom echad, so that's the whole struggle, the ruchniistic struggle that we have in learning Torah, that here you learn one halacha, there you learn another halacha. They don't seem to go together. They seem to contradict each other. That you have to have yigia, to figure out the correct tam behind the halacha in order to take away all the contradictions. And as we clearly see that as we went into the darkness of Golus, look at the latter Achrayim, how more elaborate they are, how deeper they get, how more analytical they have to get, way beyond the earlier generations. Like Hasidus always gives the example that if you go into a room and there's light in the room and you're looking for the door, you see the door, you go straight for the door. In the earlier generations, they opened up the Torah, they knew right away what God wants. Now that we are in the dark, so first of all, that's the problem. But you know what the advantage is? So what do you do when you're in the dark? You start tapping to find your way out. And then you touch something, and then you have to analyze, is this the window or is this the door? So the blind person ends up becoming even more familiar with his or her environment more than the person that's not blind. So yes, there was a challenge that God put us in the dark, that there is no halacha berura, there's no tam written clearly, there's no clear text, but because of that, because of the darkness, that's a yisra in or that we had yigia during Golus, and we came to a clarity that we would not have had without it. God willing, to be continued. Yup.
Shkoyach.
Yes, of course, Rabbi.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.